In the early part of the 21st century, the world was in turmoil. We were consumed with the aftermath of the global pandemic, the threat of nuclear war, and the climate emergency. Despite it all, we hurried about our lives, expectant that our world would continue as it always has, the indomitable human spirit never wavering. Yet no one considered, with all of the fears we had made by our own hands, that it would be a threat from another world that would bring our society to its inevitable demise, and that for all of our technology, we would be powerless to stop them. What had taken us thousands of years to build would be wiped out in just 17 days. Those who survived record this event as the harvesting. Episode 2. Red Dust. Outside a deserted shopping centre, 3 reject dogs fought over a man's corpse as they dragged it from under a tree. Red froth from the reject dogs' mouths flew every which way. Otherwise, it was a beautiful winter's day in northern England. In the thicket, John, Addie and Lee remained comatose in John's SUV. Light found its way through the trees. John came awake and looked at the new world. It seemed the same as the previous. Addie began to awaken, followed by Lee, who coughed up a glob of reddish-orange bile.
What the hell?
You two okay? Anything broken? Lee spat the glob out of the broken window and wiped the dried blood and gunk off his face.
I'm good, I think.
What the fuck did we drink last night? Asked Addie. He pulled his phone from his pocket.
What happened?
Asked Lee.
No idea, answered John. I remember passing that in, then nothing.
Check your phones, lads, said Addie. John and Lee pulled out their cell phones.
Mine's dead, so's mine.
The 3 men got out of the Land Cruiser. John noticed the SUV was covered with dark red dust. He touched a finger to the grit, then wiped his hand clean. Addie noticed.
Well, that's not normal.
No, it isn't. Lee leaned against the wrecked SUV and began a coughing fit.
You sure you're okay, Lee?
Asked Addie. Lee waved Addie's concern away. John spotted a stain on Addie's jeans, like he'd wet himself, and it had dried. Come on, we should get some help. John, Addie and Lee began to walk up the hill to where they crashed through the fence. At the road at the top of the rise, John noticed splinters of broken fence remained scattered on the grass verge. The road was silent and empty. John picked up a piece of the fence lying on the road. You'd think someone would have noticed. John tossed the broken board a few meters beyond the road.
What now?
Asked Lee.
Let's head to the inn. It's only a mile or so back up the road. I need to let Sam know I'm okay, but I'm going to be late.
What about your car and our bags?
Asked Addie.
We'll come back for them once I've called Sam and hired a car.
John, Addie and Lee rounded a corner. Ahead in the lay-by was the camper van they'd passed. Now it was covered in dry reddish-orange dust. The camper van door was open, but there was no sign of the elderly couple. The men approached the vehicle. The picnic table and chairs outside had blown over. Lee looked clammy and pale. He was out of breath. John approached the camper van and knocked on the open door, peering inside.
Hello? Anyone here?
No answer came. John climbed in, followed by Addie. Lee leaned against the vehicle's exterior, gasping for breath. Inside, mouldy food and dehydrated tea sat on the table.
Where do you think they've gone?
Wondered Addie.
No idea, but this isn't a cheap setup. They didn't leave without a reason, said John.
Addie picked up a phone that lay next to the stove.
Dead.
Lee pulled himself in. He looked very ill.
Anything?
We should keep moving to the inn. Do you want to rest here? We'll come back for you.
No, good to go.
Lee exited the camper van, followed by Addie. John left last, pulling the door shut. As the men headed down the road, John and Addie walked ahead. Lee trailed behind.
What do you think's going on with Lee?
Muttered Addie.
Maybe he's shaken by the crash. He may have got the worst of it by being in the back seat, said John. Addy looked back to Lee, who nearly sank to a knee before righting himself.
Maybe.
They came across the army helicopter that had circled above the inn. It had crashed near the road, lying on its side, the biohazard sign visible. John approached the wreckage. Addy and Lee stayed back. The rear of the helicopter was charred, but the crushed cabin had not burned. The remains of the machine were covered with red dust. Inside, John saw 2 dead pilots and 5 dead passengers, their bodies intact. 2 of the passengers wore hazmat suits. The others all wore military uniforms.
Anything?
Asked Addy.
All dead from the crash,
said John.
I can smell that from here. Looks like they've been dead for some time. Not sure how that works, said Addy.
Lee vomited a huge glop of reddish-orange potatoes and eggs. About a half-mile up the road, John and Addy walked together while Lee fell farther behind. It was silent. No cars passed, no planes above, and no trains on the East Coast main line. "What the hell's going on?" wondered John.
"Let's get to the inn," said Addy. "I don't like the look of Lee. Something is wrong with him."
When they reached the inn, they noticed the cars in the parking lot were covered in the same dust as the Land Cruiser and the camper van. Trash cans lay on their sides. John, Addy, and Lee walked through the mess and up the steps to the inn. They entered the inn. The lobby appeared abandoned. The wall-mounted TV monitor displayed a blue screen. The electricity was still on, but there was no reception. In the dining room, rotting food and dusty glasses sat untouched on the tables. A dropped tray of food and drinks lay on the floor. Chairs had toppled. No one was present. Jesus fucking Christ.
"Call Sam on the landline," said Addy. "Let her know you're okay. We'll figure this out."
John headed to the phone on the wall. Addy turned to Lee, who'd begun to develop a rash on his face.
"Sit down, mate. You look like shit,"
said Addy. "You're not so hot yourself," answered Lee. Addy failed to sound upbeat as he replied,
"I'm the good-looking one. Keep in mind what that says about you."
Lee tried to force a laugh, but bent into a coughing fit, expelling more red bile. Addy helped him into a chair.
"Stay here. I'll get some water for you."
Lee began to choke. He fell off the chair, frothing at the mouth. Addy rushed back to him, sitting him upright and smacking his back. "God, brave!"
"Come on, mate, settle down. Give it a minute and take it in slow."
Lee took a couple of deep breaths, then he spewed a huge red glob and wiped his face.
"There you go," said Addy. "Spit the fucker out, just like you're my cheap whore."
Lee tried to laugh, but he began to cough again. He looked worse than ever, but recovered enough to speak. "You twat."
"Okay."
"I think there's a chance I'll live. I'll get the water myself." Addy watched Lee leave, clearly concerned. John came back from the bar. Lee headed into the kitchen.
"Did you get through?"
asked Addy. "No answer. It just went direct to the house and cell voicemail."
"Doesn't mean anything, mate. She could be out."
"It's Connor's birthday and she always has a phone on her." Before Addy could respond, Lisa came from the bathroom hallway. John and Addy turned to face her. Lisa walked carefully toward them. She held her head with a hand, and she looked a little worse for wear in her rumpled blue business suit, carrying her high heels and wedding hat. "What happened?" John approached her. Addy stayed back. "We don't know." "Where did everyone go?" she asked. "Where's Tom? Where's my husband?" Lisa pushed past John and looked around. She moved to the table where she and Tom had been seated. The food and drinks were still there, poorly aged.
"We have no idea," said Addy. "We're travelling home from work. The best we can figure is that we fell asleep and crashed."
Lisa pulled her phone from her pocket. She checked it. The battery was dead. "It's impossible. My phone was fully charged." Lisa headed toward the exit of the inn's dining room. John followed her. "Wait." Lisa stopped and turned to face John. "I have to find Tom."
"We need to figure out what's happened," said John.
"The border with England is just a few miles down the road. Let's head south. See if there's anyone who can help." "You think this could just be in Scotland?" asked Lisa. "I don't know, but if it isn't, then we'll figure it from there. Do you have a car?" "Yes," said Lisa. She held her keys protectively in her hand.
We should get going. Let's roust Lee, said Addie.
Who? asked Lisa.
Our friend. He isn't doing well after we awoke from the crash.
John turned back to Addie. Where is Lee?
In the kitchen. I'll get him.
Before Addie could get to the kitchen, they heard a loud crash from the other side. The door swung open and Lee emerged. He looked horrific. His skin was mottled red and green. His eyes were bloodshot, staring intently around the room but without focus. Lee moved without coordination, as if he were fighting his body. Then he looked at John, Addie, and Lisa. He snapped his jaws, and he grunted. And then Lee began to approach them as though he did not know who they were, and he wanted to kill them. A Messflix production. Written by M.E. Ellington and Stephen Stiefel. Narrated and produced by Jonathan Truman.